There's an old traditional cottage on a beautiful walled garden wall, and Jamie Dunbar-Naismith had done an insert of a modern building looking out into the garden. Our client grew up in that house. His father had commissioned it. It hadn't had anything done to it for several decades, so he wanted it to be upgraded, extended and made useful for current living patterns.
It was very important to the client in terms of the brief that we must respect the original architect's intent.
For example, the living rooms have got glass at high level between the rooms so that you get a continuity of materials. So there were lots of these design aspects which were very specific, which had to be retained.
What the client wanted was to infill the overhang of the roof to make the living space bigger and integrated with a new kitchen. With infilling this piece of overhanging roof, we were losing that floating effect. This is lightness and heaviness, the contrast. So we kind of played around with other solutions and started reorganising some of the circulation at the back, which meant you could come straight through into the main house, but also allowed bedrooms on the ground floor to have ensuite bathrooms without crossing corridors and things like that. And eventually that led to us putting the extension not underneath the sort of main canopy area, but in the bad part of the walled garden, and build on the bad land, because it was this dark corner where nothing really ever happened. We felt that the main existing flat roof should be dominant and the extension should be absolutely secondary to that. So we had to try and tuck the extension in below the canopy line of the main roof. Where it did cause us problems is where the two roofs met. We'd originally wanted to have a band of glass, but we just couldn't get that to work with the restrictions of height. But what we did is took from the existing building this idea that the glass panels come off the partitions and go up into the ceiling. And so it looks like the ceiling goes through, but equally it could be a mirror. So we put a mirror along this wall where the two roofs met, and you cannot, it works very, very well. You think that the ceiling goes through.
There are big chunky wooden vertical cladding on that end of the building. We carefully took all of those off and put them on the bedroom box at the other end. They look great, but it was an example of reusing what actually turned out to be quite a good quality timber onto an existing part of the building, but giving it a fresh and more durable finish. One of the other things that we did halfway through the project was we talked about having a window in the master bedroom facing the garden at the start of the project, but I think the client thought it would be too expensive. But as we went through the project, they realized that that was a fantastic opportunity to put a big window in that master bedroom. And I have to say, it creates a fantastic master bedroom with views out to the side as well as to the front.
Yeah, I think also on the upper floor of the cottage as well, the bedrooms were very bland because they were just plasterboard coombs and very low ceilings, but it became clear that the space would be far more dramatic to create a cathedral roof within the bedrooms and expose the ties. And the client was absolutely delighted with that because it completely transformed the bedroom.
The client really spent a lot of time on colours. A big part of that house in the past was a combination of a modern building with classical paintings and furniture. And I think she's taken that to another level. So she hasn't sort of played safe with the colours. You go through and it's got bright oranges and dark blues. And we had a bathroom which looks out into the walled garden. And we went to an architectural salvage yard and with the client bought lots of old mahogany, and the bathroom is lined in mahogany. And actually we've got a couple of mirrors on the sides. It sort of looks like a bay window. It's created a real sort of gem of a room. The existing building had an old electric underfloor heating system, which was, expected to, which was at the end of its life. So putting in a new ground source heat pump to heat the building in a sustainable way was a major part of the brief.
The option of ripping up the concrete floors and replacing them to put in a new underfloor heating system just wasn't an option. Because it would have destroyed so much of the original fabric. So it meant we were faced with putting basically a radiator system in.
And we were very worried that the radiators were going to be too big, but actually they look fine. The house gets a lot of solar gain.
The walled garden was doing its job, that's what it's designed to be able to create a microclimate, and for the house, it really suited.
We went quite a long way to make sure that we could save some of the original timber windows. In fact, some of these windows have got vents that you open from the inside above them. So a key part was keeping the ventilation, which has obviously kept the building in really quite a good state of repair over the years. Where we've got new windows, they are alu-clad, so they will last a long time and they'll be low maintenance. There's a kitchen garden which has been developed, so that there is food for which will be used in the house. So it's a very rounded concept.
It's the extension and restoration of an old steading, which is in the grounds of West Girlton House, which is quite a large old traditional house which had a very substantial walled garden. And on the periphery of the walled garden was a steading, which we were successful in gaining planning consent to convert into a new really low energy house.
The brief was partly clean, just clean white walls, simple lines, the large room, the kitchen, the family room. Although there's only two of us, that's where we live. And traditionally, that's how we've lived our lives. One big warm room with everybody mucking in.
For Morecambe, I think a big part of it was to have a really low energy house. The house they were living in was a kind of very old, drafty, energy inefficient home. And for both of them, and maybe particularly for Anne, it was about keeping a really good, strong connection with the garden for her. And she's also a very passionate painter, so her painting studio was an important aspect of the brief. They have quite a big extended family, and so to have a really good size space where they could all come together as a family was an important aspect for them. And so we developed that into the kind of kitchen, dining, sitting room, which is a really generous room, but it's also quite a comfortable room just for two people to be in. So that space as being the heart of the home, I think, was really important.
My favourite bit is probably we've got a large hallway, and there's a stair at one end, which is just plain white at an angle, sort of alcove bit under the stair. The floor's slate. So that's probably the nicest bit of the house.
But because we were on a site which had boundaries with other properties, we were quite restricted in terms of where we could have windows. But thankfully, we could have windows to the south, which is what is so fundamental with passive houses, to have south-facing windows so that you can get good solar gain. And that also allowed that really strong connection between the house and the garden. So we have these large windows which bring solar gain into the property, and also this kind of connection between inside the house and the garden, which I think is really an important thing. And then we have the new build extension, which is the single story extension to the side. And we deliberately made that contrasting to the kind of heavy stone steading. So it's clad in timber, which is kind of pre-weathered, this kind of lovely grey colour, and it has a flat roof which is planted with sedum, and when it's in flower it's just absolutely covered in bees, which I just think is fantastic to have a roof of a building which is just such a habitat for wildlife.
The guttering we used, which is a galvanised Scandinavian firm, which everybody knows about, Lindab, and they actually work, it's almost an elegant form of guttering, so it works with the timber cladding and with the stone.
We use a lot of roof lights to bring light in from above.
No, we use SIP panels, structural insulated panels. It was the first time I'd ever used them. They worked reasonably well. They've achieved what they set out to do.
It's quite a windy site, and having space to cultivate plants and flowers and vegetables in a sheltered environment, and also to sit out and enjoy the garden. And I think for Anne, having her painting studio at the end of the garden so that she can leave the house, walk down through the garden and go to her studio to paint. And that has doors which open up to the garden space. I think that was important for her. Malcolm and Anne were keen for a very low energy home. The house has been designed to Passive House standards in terms of the thermal performance of the walls, the roof, the floor, all super insulated building fabric. All the windows are triple glazed. The roof lights are quadruple glazed. There is no central heating system required by the house. The main sources of heating are an electric AGA in the kitchen. Then there's a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system. It's very, very efficient to run. There's also solar thermal panels on the roof which contribute towards domestic hot water. In the parking area beyond the walled garden, there's some photovoltaic panels mounted on the shed roof which contribute towards the electricity.
We generate more than we use. We are essentially, once we get our battery pack delivered, which is taking forever, we'll be off grid between sort of May to September.
But there's no requirement on any forms of fossil fuel.
There's not a lot not to like.
We had bought a listed building in 2016 in the new town in Edinburgh. Truly, it was absolutely hideous. It was damp, it was smelly, it was disgusting. We were looking for somebody who could build light into the building. So to take an old building and to keep the quality of that building, the Georgian quality, these beautiful high ceilings, but to just bring this minimalist, bright light approach to it.
With it being an A-listed building in such a terrible condition, and it wasn't just superficially terrible, like it hadn't been looked after for years or upgraded for years. It had some serious problems, structural problems. And, it was clear looking at the building that these problems had been addressed in the past. There had been significant common repairs done on the building, but they hadn't worked. We believed that we were going to have to deal with the structural problems there because, you went in on one beautiful grand Georgian level and then you went down and you went down again. And the two levels below very much felt like basement. And, the levels, the problems got worse as you went down through the building. So for us, it was about opening one of the levels up side to side. So the lower ground floor, we opened up side to side to get a maximum connection with the garden, the huge garden plot that they had. We stripped the whole property out. So it was sort of in conservation terms, we took out all the carpets, the curtains, enclosed all of the original fireplaces in secure boxes and bolted them to the walls and left the building with the windows securely open for almost a year. And, we put in monitoring strips to see how much movement was still happening within the building. It didn't really take well to being underpinned, and there were some really difficult moments where the bearing capacity of the soil seemed to have been lost.
I mean, the description to me was, it was like standing on sand at the seaside. The water, you were just going down into the mud.
It turned out that there had been a drainage problem in this building, and we think that's what all of the history of the building's problems was related to. Once we managed to find that problem, fix it, the building started to self-heal and the bearing capacity returned to the soil. But in terms of the design brief, Laura was very clear, and she left us lots of scope to input into the design brief. But from her point of view, she wanted a contemporary heart in this home. She wanted to pull all the levels together. She wanted lots of windows onto this garden and a proper connection so she could open a door and be in her garden.
Our daughters live on the Georgian floor and Colin and I live on the next floor, and we have a cinema downstairs and a bar area for a multi-generational family approach, but also my parents could come and stay with us. So we've got a direct route out to the garden with very few steps so that they can get to their cars as they're getting older.
But in terms of the concept, we've kept all of the room forms, the Georgian form of all of the rooms, and we've kept all of the bathrooms in the subsidiary room spaces in between, which is kind of true to the original concept of the original building. and allow the big Georgian rooms to sort of exist untouched, essentially. But obviously we had a lot of repairs to do all throughout. But for us, conservation and sustainability go hand in hand. I mean, they're very happy bedfellows. The very fact of taking a building like this and repairing it to the standard that it was built originally is very much a sustainable thing to do. We insulated where we could. Obviously, there were a lot of restrictions with it being EAA listed, but actually the decision to go down in the basement and underpin the building meant that we got a little bit of space, so we could insulate the whole basement level. And then that obviously created a much warmer house to begin with. And then any new materials that we put in, we made sure they were like for like, doing analysis, doing our research, and making sure that what we put back was the right thing to ensure that building's place in the future. Sourcing skill sets was another really key part of that. The lime plaster on the stair to the basement, we found a lady called Fionn who came from Fife and did the most beautiful work of art on this stair. It really was a sight to behold how she worked. And then the blacksmith came and just did this really sweet curve, and all of the undulations of the building itself just were allowed to happen behind this really sharp. And I just think that staircase is the most beautiful part of it. And for me, that was really special, seeing that come to life.
It gives me so much joy because it's an absolute haven for my family.